Thank you very much, and that will conclude our witness opening statements, and I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Professor Franks, during your testimony, you detail how the courts have interpreted Section 232 broadly. Will you explain how the interpretation of Section 230 has evolved over this time, and to what extent you think the courts have applied 232 broadly too?
Thank you. What we've seen is that this very limited immunity that was provided clearly in subsection C2 has been sort of transferred over to C1 and then expanded. Instead of saying, for instance, that you can't treat a particular intermediary as if it were the speaker of someone else's speech, we now see every kind of claim, speech claims, non-speech claims, basically anything one can imagine, being treated as though it were clear that any responsibility that the intermediary might have is foreclosed by C1. And that, I think, does not make any sense, of course, in the context of the statute, but it is also meant that in terms of incentives for the industry, it is essentially saying to the industry, you can participate in any kind of reckless, profit-maximizing behavior that you want. It doesn't matter what the consequences are for you because you will not have to pay for them.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Professor Leary, how can we strike a balance between protecting free expression and holding big tech accountable for dangerous content that it promotes under Section 230?
I think the balance is struck similar to what Dr. Sanger was saying by the reality of the marketplace. This is the only industry that things are so out of balance. So one of the ways that we can strike the balance of free speech is to really focus on the harms that are caused by Section 230. And one of the free speech aspects that is often overlooked in these discussions is this access to court, the access to civil rights from parties who are challenging the actions of these companies, and they've been completely denied and shut out. So when we talk about balancing free speech, I think we have to think about all the speech that has been shut out as a result of Section 230, all the cases that are closed off at immunity, as opposed to that are closed off after a full litigation of hearings.
Thank you. Professor Stanger, you said something kind of interesting before you closed about talking about national security. Would you want to speak to that, which you were referring to?
Yes, I'm happy to do so. I think it's important to realize that our internet is precisely unique because it's so open, and that makes it uniquely vulnerable to all sorts of cyber attacks. Just this week, we saw an extraordinarily complicated plot that is most likely done by China, Russia, or North Korea that could have blown up the internet as we know it. If you want to look up XZUtil, Google that and you'll find all kinds of details. They're still sorting out what the intention was. It's extraordinarily sophisticated, though. So I think that the idea that we have a Chinese company where data on American children is being stored and potentially utilized in China, it can be used to influence our children. It can be used in any number of ways, no matter what they tell you. So I very much support and applaud the legislation to repeal, not to repeal, but to end TikTok's operations in the United States. The national security implications are extraordinary. Where the data is stored is so important, and how it can be used to manipulate and influence us is so important. And I think the next frontier, I'll conclude with this, for warfare is in cyberspace. It's where weak countries have huge advantages. They can pour resources into hackers who could really blow up our infrastructure, our hospitals, our universities. They're even trying to get, as you know, into the House. So this House, right here. So I think repealing Section 230 is connected to addressing a host of potential harms.
In my last 35 seconds, let me ask one last follow-up on this then. You know, you're talking about our national security and the cyber attacks, and of course TikTok, as the chair mentioned, that we passed out of here. How vulnerable are we? How vulnerable are we? Are we winning this race, or are we losing this race? And about my last 14 seconds.
We we are stars in innovation, and so we want to keep that advantage, but our very openness makes us vulnerable. China doesn't have to worry about freedom of speech.
Yep.
So they get security. We've got to balance the two.
Well, thank you very much. My time has expired, and I now recognize the gentlelady from California, 16th District, for 5 minutes for questions.